Morning, everybody, and welcome. Alongside that, I just wanted to introduce Beth, who we have here in the corner, who is going to be doing some amazing pictographics of the talks and summaries, and we'll be putting them up. So it's a really lovely way to capture some of the wisdom that we'll hear. I've been asked to say a few words about how this event came to be and the story of this event. You'll all have your own stories about how you came to be here. And this event is a little bit tied up with my story. So I worked at Friends of the Earth for 10 years, and it was amazing and a lot of fun. And it really never stopped. So when I finished my time there, it took me a good few months, actually, before I could even listen to anything about the environment or be involved in anything environmental. And I really felt that there needed to be a different way of doing activism and engaging on issues that we care about. So I was at a meeting and talking to a friend, colleague, and he mentioned that there was an organisation called Ulex and that they ran events on regenerative activism, and they were doing a week-long retreat in Dartmoor in the summer. And I thought, wow, this sounds perfect. So I signed up to that. And about a month before that, I was at a yoga session that was organised by the Advaya initiative, and I was signing in, and I was chatting to Christabel over there, and she asked what my name was, and I said it's Gita, and I'm named after an ancient Hindu text on scripture, on spirituality. I didn't say that to her. I just said I'm named after the book. And Christabel said, "Oh, well, I'm doing my master's thesis on the Gita and activism and ecology." And we talked about organising conferences, and I mentioned the Ulex retreat. And I said, "I'll be in touch when I come back, because maybe there's something we could do together." And I went on the Ulex retreat, and it was, for those of you who know Ulex, will know it was super useful and inspirational, and those of you who don't know Ulex will shortly find that out. And I got back, and we came in touch in a Skype call with Advaya and Ulex together, and several months down the line, we all came here, and it was really about having a multi-platform event, really sharing some of the wisdom that's coming through on this issue, and having a dialogue. And I really spoke to me to the power of collaboration and being open to exploring new ideas and new interactions with people and encounters with people. And that's really very much my hope for all of us today. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand on to Ulex.
Regenerative activism theme. It comes out of work that we've been doing since the mid-2000s on sustainable activism. And that work gave rise to a residential training, which we've been doing since 2010, called Sustaining Resistance. So the very first Sustaining Resistance training took place shortly after the COP15, the climate meeting in Copenhagen. And that particular COP was viewed by many people in the environmental movement as a kind of last-ditch opportunity to address the challenges of climate change. And, well, at the COP15 we failed dismally. And it left the climate movement, the environmental movement more widely, in a state of internal crisis. There was quite widespread burnout individually and across organisations. So you'd think that obvious need would create a lot of interest in a training about sustainable activism. But actually we still met a lot of widespread scepticism. You know, in activist circles it was still quite common to regard taking time out to explore self-care, burnout and activist sustainability as something of a distracting indulgence. Fortunately, in the nearly 10 years since then, things have changed considerably. I think there is a shift in activist culture from a kind of, a certain cynicism about the idea of addressing well-being within activist circles to a much more conscious approach to organising, which makes personal and organisational sustainability a much more kind of integral concern. And, in a way, I hope that this kind of gathering of us today kind of, in a sense, kind of, in some ways gives a bit of sort of testimony to something of that shift. And that shift is really important because burnout and sustainability are incredibly damaging to individuals and our movements. So burnout there are lots of ways of being able to describe it, and one of the descriptions I like most comes from one of my colleagues, Lou Hemmerman. And Lou, she says that burnout is three things. She says that it's depletion, contraction, and disconnection. And these three, depletion, contraction, and disconnection, they damage activists and they seriously damage our movements. They damage our movement longevity and wisdom. They damage our movement creativity, and they damage our movement solidarity and alliance building. In terms of our movement longevity and wisdom, and we know that really effective social movements, they often span generations. You know, they arise from a multi-generational accumulation of skill and experience and relationships and shared history. And the depletion of burnout, it ruptures that continuity. I'm sure many of us are familiar or aware of our colleagues, friends who have dropped out of engagement for these kind of reasons. And we're probably also very aware of the loss of skill and talent and the learning that we've lost with them. In terms of movement creativity, burnout gives rise to a loss of flexibility and responsiveness. The mental and emotional contraction shows up as cynicism and despondency. And we lose the additional capacity to think outside the box. We get stuck in ruts of tactical repetition and end up shielding ourselves behind sort of limiting armour of a kind of narrow ideology. And in terms of movement, alliance building and solidarity, the disconnection of burnout, it estranges us from ourselves, and it estranges us from our colleagues, and it estranges us from other people in our movements. We lose the capacity to empathise. We lose the capacity to recognise the commonality of our struggles, and we lose the capacity to work well with the differences of our struggles. It's a highly political issue. It's connected, burnout is very much connected with repression. So we see it linked to the breakdown in trust that arises from infiltration of our movement. We see it linked to the ways that we reproduce structural oppression within our movements in terms of, say, gender or race. It's linked to state violence and the direct and the vicarious trauma that results from it. Obviously, it's linked to unjust and irrational distribution of resources, as well as, obviously, to the sheer scale of what we're up against. So it's deeply political. Creating cultures of care is deeply political. Refusing to reproduce the patterns, the dysfunctional patterns of capitalism and patriarchy within our movements is deeply political. And building movements that can resist repression, that have the staying power to win, is deeply political. And it's ubiquitous. You know, burnout, it shows up across, in every facet of activist movements, of our social movements, from direct action, grassroots organising, community organising, through to, you know, the desk of chief strategists and well-resourced in anti-fascist and queer organising, to environmental policy development and research work. it shows up in different ways in these different places, and it's conditioned by diverse factors, but it is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So the Ulex Project, we seek to help to address these issues through activist education. And for us, activist education means helping people to learn from each other's struggles. Right? Activist education for us is learning from each other's struggles. So, hopefully that's what we're doing here today, right? And we've got a number, a range of different people speaking, a number of different workshops exploring the issues. But then, of course, there's all of us, right? All of us here today. And, as we know, normally the most important conversations are the ones that happen outside of the sessions, in the breaks, in the corridors, over lunch, or, down the pub afterwards. Yeah? So there's all of us here to learn from each other. We also hope it will be a reflective space. At Ulex, we make reflections a very integral part of our approach to education. As activists, there's always a lot to do. Right? We're sort of drawn to action, but of course, learning and being responsive requires us to find a balance between action and reflection. As activists, to be effective, to get stuff done, we actually often have to stop. We have to pause. We have to open up a space of receptivity, which can be hard when there's so much that we're aware needs doing. But we need to stop, pause, open up a space of receptivity, a space of not knowing often, a space of curiosity. And with that, very often, those spaces of receptivity and not knowing also comes vulnerability. There comes sensitivity. And these are all such important qualities and elements in building a more sustainable and regenerative approach to our activism. So I want to start now by asking you to just, engage in a short reflective activity, okay? And the idea is to begin by just arriving here with each other. So just kind of like, looking around and seeing who's here. Take each other in a little bit. Kind of like, oh, we're not sitting on the tube. We don't have to kind of avert our eyes from each other every time we sort of catch someone's eyes. We're just sort of taking each other in a little bit and, letting people notice that you're here, right? You're actually here. Great. So arriving each other. I mean, what a, incredible sort of talent and experience here, right? Amazing integrity. Everyone here, obviously, has just bothered to show up. I mean, maybe if it was sunny and they were going to hang out in Regent's Park, they might not have, but, today they bothered to show up, right? And, they care about this stuff as you care about it. So as well as arriving with each other, just kind of, arriving a little bit more with ourselves as well. It's like, oh yeah, sitting, feeling ourselves present, physically present, embodied. And just checking out, how are you feeling? What's going on energetically? Are you still a bit knackered from whatever was going on last night, bad night's sleep, or, you well rested? Are you excited about the day? Are you anxious about it? How are you feeling? Just checking in with yourself, really, with that. And with that in mind, I want you just there's some sheets of paper knocking around on your seats, I think. And on one side, there's a couple of questions. And so just with yourself, just silently for yourself for a minute or two, just check in. It's like, why does today really matter to you? And what is it that you want to get out of the day? Why are you here? It's like we've done whatever we've done this morning, got on the tube, bus, bike, arrived here, bang, here we go. Before we get into it, let's just take that time to really check in, why are we here? And what do we want to get out of that? What's the intention that we're bringing to the day? Okay? If you've got something to write in, you can jot a couple of things down. So what do we want to get out of the day? the clearer we are as to why it matters and what we're looking for, the more likely we are to help ourselves to find it. And then, what about the second question is, what kind of concerns might you have about the day? I mean, maybe initially it's like, well, not too many, or maybe something obvious comes to mind. If there's nothing so obvious, well, just drop down into that a little bit more, just allow the possibility that somewhere in the psyche there's a little bit of anxiety or something we're a bit bothered about, something we think might not work for us very well. So again, a couple of things, anything that concerns you, any concerns you have about the day. And then there's something there about, is there something that, you've got these intentions, you've got, maybe some concerns. Is there something that you can be conscious about doing that will help you to realise those intentions? Maybe, one of your intentions to connect with people, and, some of us are a bit shy. So maybe just that intention to step up a little bit more. Who knows what it might be. But how might you help yourself today? To get what you need. And finally, this last question is something you can do to help me. So who's you? Well, you is somebody sitting next to you, right? So I'm going to ask you just to sort of turn to someone sitting next to you or near where you're sitting. Ideally, someone you don't really know, right? If that's all right for you. Ideally, someone you don't really know. Yeah? And if it's okay for you to do that, just tell them, what have you written on here? What are you saying? What is it you want to get out of the day? Why does it matter? Do you have some concerns? And what might they be able to do to support you to meet those intentions today? Yeah? So a couple of minutes each. So, a couple of minutes each in pairs. Conversation, that's all right. Okay, so at the Ulex Project, we call our approach integral activist training because it's holistic and systemic. It's holistic in the sense that we seek to address the whole person, the thinking, the feeling, the sensory. So, the head, the heart and our guts and the body, the sensual. And it's systemic in that it recognises the interconnection between the personal and the psychological and the interpersonal, the relational. The social, the political, and the ecological. The way that the personal and psychological is nested within the socio-political, and the socio-political is nested within the evolutionary and the ecological. And building resilience and sustainability as activists, we need to bring attention to all of these levels. The interpersonal as well as the personal, the political and interpersonal. So that involves us in both inner work and outer work. So just as, you know, I mentioned after when we first started doing sustaining resistance, noticing this general skepticism within activism to explore sustainability or well-being, even more so when you're talking about the inner work dimension of it, very common to find in activism this real reluctance to engage with the sort of inner work, seeing practices, therapeutic practices or meditation, other contemplative practices, as very much just distraction from the real work out there. And it certainly can be, right? It really can be. We live in a time that conditions us towards atomistic and narcissistic views of the self and encourages us in individualistic strategies for sort of surviving in this world. There's a lot of truth, I think, in what Slavoj Žižek says about Western Buddhism, for example. So he says, it presents itself as the remedy against the stress of capitalism's dynamics. By allowing us to uncouple and retain some inner peace, he says, it actually functions as the perfect ideological supplement to capitalism. There are real dangers in practices that focus on the psychological, on our mental states, that offer some kind of quasi-spiritual salvation. They compound the tendencies of capitalist consumerism. They can lead us to withdraw from socio-political engagement. They can lead to a reactionary collusion. Miles Horton, who is the founder of the Highlander Institute, which played a really key role in capacity building within the civil rights movement in the United States in the 1960s, he put it like this. He says, if it starts on the inside, it tends to stay on the inside. And yet, if we harness these same practices, these inner practices, to a strong altruistic commitment, to a commitment to act in solidarity with others and to act in solidarity with life, they're incredibly transformative. They can enable us to draw on deeper resources, and they can enable us to really bring the best of ourselves to our activism. If as activists, we already start with a strong orientation towards acting beneficially in the world, in the wider world, if we're clear about the social and the political, the structural and the ecological context of our lives, that inner work is unlikely to deflect us into cul-de-sacs of quasi-spiritual self-preoccupation. Instead, it will enable us to harness enormous potential in service of our struggles and in service of each other. So Ulex, our approach to the inner work is to emphasize 3 dimensions. So we emphasize mindful awareness, skillful emotion, and mindsets and worldviews. So mindful awareness, it can sound a bit dry sometimes, but it's really key, right, to deepening self-knowledge, key to developing psychological integration. Rather than allowing ourselves to be hollowed out by the fragmenting and disembodying tendencies of modern life, by what's been called the paid reality, paid being an acronym for pressure, always on, information overload and distraction, instead of allowing ourselves to be hollowed out by the paid reality. The development of mindful awareness, it enables us to reclaim the fecund richness of consciousness. It enables us to reclaim a cognitive vitality. It helps us to reclaim an embodied and deeply sensual experience in life, to reclaim presence and courage and the openness of mind that come with that. And complementing that cooler cognitive dimension of mindful awareness is the aspect of skillful emotion. You know, the heart work, which is so important. As Pascal said, the heart has its reasons that reason does not know. So these are practices that help us to develop emotional awareness, emotional literacy, help us to claim back the wholehearted range of emotional experience, both the kind of the heights of joy and the depths of our grief, which are so important for empowerment. They help us to free ourselves from apathy and indifference and hopelessness, without denying, the pain and the despair that's such an integral part of really affirming life. They can help us to deepen our capacity for empathy, necessary to work in solidarity with each other. They can help us to really meet our anger and learn to channel it well. To deepen our compassion without it driving us to depletion. So this combination of mindful awareness and skillful emotion, they support a deepening self-awareness, they support a psychological integration, emotional literacy. And between them, they can help us to begin to get underneath the surface of our experience, to begin to notice the mindsets and the views that we carry, the stories, the inner stories that we carry that condition our experience. An important aspect of that is beginning to recognize the constructed nature of our identity, especially in relationship to our activist identity. Because then we can start to notice when our activist identity empowers us and when it traps us. When our activist identity imprisons us or liberates us. When we begin to notice the fragility of our identity, we also notice how tightly we hold on to our views. And we can begin to notice the necessarily partial and provisional nature of our beliefs. If we can begin to hold those more lightly, of course, we're open to learning. We're learning from experience and learning from each other. We can avoid ideological dead ends. And in our political work, this is so important. The world's always changing. There's nothing we know about it that isn't going to need to be revised. We need to be able to keep making those shifts and changes. We work in a world which is never going to conform to the way that we want it to be. We live in a world that's never going to be reducible to the way we think it is. So learning to work well with our views, how to hold them lightly, is so crucial to an effective activism. Okay, so I'm going to step into another short reflective kind of space. So this is very simple mindfulness activity. I know some of you know this very well. In fact, I learned it from some of you. So this is called a three-step breathing space. Yeah, I think Paul calls it. So yeah, very simple. So let's just another way of kind of checking with ourselves in a way. And there are three parts. There's a part which is acknowledging what's going on. There's a part which is gathering our attention a bit more fully. And there's a part which is kind of expanding our awareness back out into the room more fully. So, sitting in a way where you can feel your body kind of, nice and grounded. And yeah, let your arms sort of rest on your lap somewhere. Put down your pens and bits of paper, whatever, if you can. And if you feel comfortable, closing your eyes. And if it doesn't work for you to close your eyes, then just let your gaze kind of fall on the floor, somewhere just in front of you, without focusing on anything in particular with your eyes, if they're open. So, already we're bringing awareness into our bodies, aren't we? Sort of paying attention to how we're sitting like this. And this first phase of acknowledgement is just taking time to notice, so what's going on? Starting with the really tangible. How is your body feeling? How is the body feeling? What's the kind of the feel of the energy in the body? Sluggish, bright. How does the body feel? Is there discomfort? Is there ease? And perhaps really consciously being aware of your sense of connection to the ground. So you can feel the weight of the body, perhaps, as it presses down onto the cushions beneath you. Maybe you can consciously give the weight of your legs to the floor through your feet. So settling into the cushion and settling into whatever's going on in our experience, in the body. And within the body, within the sort of the energy of the body, what about the emotions? What's stirring at the emotional level? And maybe nothing particular, but just opening up a space for whatever might be going on in the heart and the guts. Just whatever's there. Not needing to judge that experience, but just noticing what's happening at the heart level, in the guts. And, there might be probably some thoughts trailing through the mind, maybe thoughts cascading through the mind. Just noticing the passing of thoughts. And moving on to the stage of gathering. So I'm going to encourage you to bring your awareness to your breathing. How's the physical sensation of breathing? So noticing the rising and falling perhaps in the chest, maybe the movement in the abdominal muscles. Just noticing the breath coming and going. And just for a couple of minutes, just the idea of the exercise is just to choose to gather your awareness with the sensations of the breathing. So you're following those sensations, following the rhythm, the texture, and the movement of the breath. And other things may come up, drawing your attention elsewhere, and just gently, not making a big deal out of it, just gathering your attention back with the breathing. It doesn't matter if there's things pulling you away, other distractions, just see if you can let them go a little and gather your attention a bit more fully, slowly, gently with the breath, the tangible sensations of breathing. So just for another minute or so, bringing your awareness to the breathing as best you can. And then in this final stage of of the exercise and the practice, the expansion, just first of all noticing, being aware of the whole of the body if you can. And noticing the sounds around us. Allowing your awareness to expand back out into the room, opening your eyes if they're closed, beginning to gently move the body and just coming back into presence with each other a bit more fully. So, the personal and the inner dimension, the inner work, is vitally important in addressing activist burnout and sustainability. But actually, burnout is rarely a personal matter. Burnout and resilience and sustainability are very much about our group culture. The ways that we work together, the ways that we take care of each other, or the ways that we fail to do that. So that's why at Ulex we run a lot of trainings that focus on skills for effective collaboration. And at the beginning of those courses, we often ask the question, why collaborate? And we offer sort of 4 kind of main reasons for that. We say, first of all, empowerment and effectiveness. Clearly many of the problems we face they require collective solutions. And as activists, it's the way that our individual action comes together with others to create collective agency. That's the way that we build the social movements that can shape our future. The second is honouring connection. Collaboration is a practice that helps us to honour the fact of interconnectedness, to break out of the conceit of our separateness, to heal our alienation personally and collectively. Another reason is synergy and creativity, because as we know, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's only when we come together that we can release and create that magic that only happens between us. And fourthly, we point to the importance of collaboration as a means of embodying our values. There are values that we can only embody together. Solidarity is something we can only embody together. We can't embody solidarity on our own. And embodying those values is crucial. When we do embody those values, we build our confidence in what is possible. We empower the radical imagination. So although Mark Fisher has claimed that capitalism seamlessly occupies the horizon of the thinkable, when we act collaboratively, when we embody the values of collaboration in our lives, we actually live beyond the horizon of capitalist hegemony. And we prefigure the kind of world that we're struggling for. But it's not easy, right? Collaboration isn't easy. And we all know how hard it can be to work together. But it's not because we're bad intrinsically at cooperating. Cooperation is as intrinsic to human evolution as competition. But our capacity for it, to collaborate and to cooperate, has been degraded. Especially in recent years, the effect of neoliberalism upon our communities, upon individuals, leads to a breakdown of trust, kind of psychological wounding. Our communities have been stripped of the roots and the nourishment that's necessary to support our collective efforts, our collective action. This is where the importance of regenerative activism comes from. It's like that social degradation of neoliberalism. It's analogous to the degradation caused by intensive industrial agriculture. Industrial agriculture is extractive. Through monoculture farming, through deforestation, the destruction of habitats and the loss of biodiversity, it just draws and destructs. It just extracts from the land. And in that context, sustainable agriculture isn't sufficient. Agricultural practices need to go beyond sustainable practices to a form of regeneration. And the same is true in terms of our activism. We need to find a way to create and envision activism that isn't extractive. It doesn't lead to depletion and contraction and disconnection. We need it to be a space where we as individuals and in our collectives, we can learn and we can grow together. It needs to be a space where we can live deeply meaningful lives, a space where we support each other to realise our potential, to build relationships that embody our values. It needs to be a transformative space where individuals can feel the empowerment of acting together, feel the synergy in our diversity, and the love at the heart of our solidarity. Regenerative activism, in short, it needs to be a space where we can come to know the truth of what Alice Walker claims, that resistance is one of the secrets of joy. So, regenerative activism, we're going to spend the day in an interesting exploration, rich and diverse contributions to that, which we're going to start with a conversation, right, that you're going to facilitate.
Thank you.
Yeah.